Folks, we are here. I'm so happy to be back in Alan's garage here, and we're going to catch up with him on the latest on this Ferro racing engine that he put back in after rebuilding, and we're going to discuss with him where he's at in the process and how it works.
Okay, well, it's all installed now. I did one more thing that you didn't see as I was installing it. Okay. I was recreating spark plugs. So this is an original spark plug for it.
Look at that.
And Tom made it, Thomas Edison.
Thomas Edison, an Edison plug.
So that's what it's supposed to look like. But all you can buy today are plugs that look like this.
Right.
So the reach is not right.
No, that's very different.
So I just stuck this in my manual lathe and I machined it down about
look at that.
a quarter of an inch. So now it makes the threads go in the threaded portion the correct way. So now I've made it really similar to the Thomas Edison plugs.
Yes, you did. Look at that.
And I didn't change the heat range any because the threads are still creating the heat sink on the cylinder walls. So the heat range isn't any different, but the fire will be right where the pistons are.
Perfect.
And then if I machined it even more, the way I have it, since I raised the compression by 1/8 of an inch by adding a flat top on the piston, if I machined this down so it went to the exact spot for firing, it would touch, this portion would touch the piston.
Right.
So I've made several extras also. So in the next few hundred years, if somebody needs a spark plug, it'll be in the bag in the car, and they can see what the correct spark plug is. And I'll keep a Thomas Edison spark plug in the car too, always, so they know what the original spark plug looks like.
Fascinating. That is really
because
great.
Thomas Edison, even his kids aren't even making them anymore.
Is that right?
No, they're not.
You're not available?
No.
Wow. As long as we're talking about combustion and spark plugs, on the last video we didn't really discuss the combustion chamber and how that works on this engine.
The combustion chamber is basically a cylinder right above the piston. There is it's not an L-head, it's an overhead valve motor, like a Hemi would be. So the entire combustion area is in the top half inch, top 3/8, 7/16 of an inch right above the piston.
Okay.
You know, an L-head, there might be passageways on each side. One side might have the spark plug, one side might have the intake and the exhaust. Some of them even have an exhaust valve on one side of the piston bore and the exhaust valve on the other side and the spark plug somewhere.
Okay.
This one is very, very tidy. So all the combustion happens exactly above the piston. So what does that mean? That means once it fires, all of the pressure is right there pushing the piston right back down again.
Okay.
It is not trying to gather up the flame and the explosion on each side of the combustion chamber like what a V8 would be on a Ford V8.
Okay.
You know, that we're 16 or 17 years later. This is a very efficient racing engine. So since you don't have much room, you make sure that you thread that spark plug and you make sure it's not touching anything. When you put it on top dead center on the pistons and you look through the spark plug hole, you'll see about 1/8 of an inch of the piston right now.
That's
because
wild.
we've raised compression. No problem. We're just going to back the spark plug out a teeny bit so we don't have that in the way, and we're still getting the benefit of the raised compression. So that makes it more efficient also.
Okay. And one thing we saw the heads separately.
Yes.
But I didn't get a good idea of the orientation of how the valves are relative to the spark plug. Are they kind of on either side of the spark plug?
No.
How do they work?
The spark plugs are in the head, directly in the bore line. Right above. So if the piston top is looking straight at the two valves.
Okay.
And the spark plug is threaded in from the side.
Okay.
A Hemi would be threaded in from the top.
Right.
So it's not a Hemi.
Right.
But it's threaded in the side.
Okay.
So it's 99% as efficient as the Hemi. Or the Hemi would be more efficient because the spark plug is in the center.
Yep.
So when the flame goes, it goes all the way around perfectly in that cylinder. So that's the ultimate design.
Okay.
But this has water jackets there. But since this is a pretty small bore, and it has no other areas for combustion to happen, you know, yes, the flame is spreading across the piston, but it's pretty darn efficient compared to other engines of the day.
Right, and it's an overhead valve. The valves are right there.
Right there.
They're not making any turns or going anywhere else to get to them.
And it's just as efficient as my 1913 Bugatti race car is here.
Okay.
So this is not a Bugatti, but it's pretty darn amazing.
Yeah.
And this is 3-liter, and the Bugatti is only 1,500, and they're both going to be about this. Maybe this will be more, but
yeah, we'll see, huh?
yeah, we'll see.
What do you need to do to get this thing actually ready to run?
Okay, I've been doing some dry runs around the neighborhood. I live on basically a gated area with a racetrack, a 2-mile racetrack around it, so I have no traffic whatsoever, so I can hook up a strap and I can pull a car around. So what you do the first time on an antique car engine, since all the Babbitt has got the clearances to the Babbitt, which is about 1/1000 and a half, and then you've got all the side loading, which adds more friction, but that's not really a measurable amount. So when you rebuild an antique engine that you were crank starting it prior, and it's a loosey-goosey engine from 100 and some years ago, 110 years ago, you're not crank starting a new high-performance antique engine with all the Babbitt tight. You know, you need to pull it around. You need to do things.
So you're saying dry, there's no coolant in it?
No, it's got oil and it's got coolant, but it's got no fuel.
Okay.
And it's got no ignition turned on.
Okay.
So the first time, for the first 2 miles, at least a mile of it, I'll put it into third gear, into drive, and without the spark plugs even in it, I'll pull it around for a 1/4 of a mile to get it loose, a teeny bit loose, and listen to the engine as an air compressor and make sure nothing is not clearancing correctly. Make sure everything is running smooth like an air compressor backwards would be running.
Okay.
And if that's good, that's the first step. That means at least you got everything adjusted so it doesn't hit and your clearances are right. You didn't leave a pair of pliers in there. I mean, you've got all the things in spin. If you made the mistake and you got excited and you turned the ignition on and the gas the first time and you hit a key or you started pulling it with a vehicle and you had those issues, it still might start if you had ignition and gasoline, and you would have to rebuild it again because you'd break something.
Right.
So it's a nice way to start, but pull it around a little bit to see how the freedom of all the bearings are and the piston's moving, and that's all free. Another thing to do, you put new head gaskets in this. And the head gaskets aren't factory head gaskets. I didn't make them, but they were made by somebody, and you put your sealant on both sides, and it's been sitting for a week or so with water in it. So you don't know that you don't have water above the piston. The pistons are down pretty low, so you can't really look inside because the spark plug's at the side. You can't look around the corner. So it's just as easy to pull it and make sure you don't have any spray of water or mist whatsoever, and make sure you don't have any water. So the first time you're pulling it in third gear for a little bit, and if everything's fine, then you switch it to second gear, so you're increasing the RPM, and maybe you're increasing the RPM enough that you can start see the oil pressure after a few hundred yards start building. Okay. Because now you're pulling it fast enough to get oil pressure.
Yep.
Is it dangerous the first 1/4 of a mile pulling it without any oil pressure? No, because you have all the assembly lube in there anyway. You don't need oil pressure. Okay. You don't have the crankshaft full of oil, and you don't have it replenishing what you're wearing down, but you're not heating up anything. You have no combustion happening.
Right.
So the next 1/4 of a mile, you put it into second gear, so you're pulling it 1,000, 1,500 RPM, and now if everything is right, then you have 30 or 40 pounds of oil pressure. So you're looking at that, and then you're pulling it for a 1/4 of a mile, and you stop. Then you look at the entire engine and all of your lines and see what's leaking. And there's going to be some that are leaking because you have external pumps, you have external lines. This is an external distribution center that's adjustable as far as your gas pedal.
Okay.
So you have a lot of external lines that a modern engine doesn't have. So you look at those, and yes, we have 3 small leaks. So great. If it was leaking when you first started it, you'd be running it because you'd be happy because it started.
Yeah.
And then you'd have a mess.
Right.
And then you have a hot exhaust, and so you have a double, triplet mess. So it's almost better, I think it's way better, to pull it, the next step, and you're looking for oil pressure and oil leaks.
Yeah.
So that you pull that around, and if that's all good and you tighten it, and if it leaked and you take it around again and you don't have any oil leaks, you don't have any water leaks, the engine sounds like an air compressor, and you have the spark plugs in it now, and you have enough clearance, they're not hitting anything, and you hear the compression happening. Then bring it back, and then try to hand crank it if you can. If you are lucky enough that you have an electric start like this one actually does. An electric start happened in 1912-13.
Oh.
So this is a 1913 engine in a 1915 car, so it does have an electric starter. But does it have a modern electric starter? No, it's a 110-year-old starter. So you don't want to do that with a tight engine.
Right.
So we're going to use it, we're going to try the hand crank,
Okay.
which actually I did before you came, and I can't do it. But the electric starter probably will spin it over, and then that may start the engine. And if it doesn't, the video will be pulling it to get it to start and let it sit for 20 minutes at idle and just above, and then some blips to get it to run.
Okay.
And then they'll loosen it up that much more too.
Interesting.
And,
Okay.
and put oil into more of the things. Everything's mechanical on this. All the lifters are mechanical. Everything is really mechanical.
Okay.
So there's some of it needs to be splashed, like on the camshaft. There's no way that the journals get much and the cam lobes get much oil besides the splash from it running. And
Right.
so there's things that won't have oil till it actually starts really running.
Right.
Okay, if it starts, it's also got assembly lube in it. So it's going to smoke for a little bit because all that burns off. So every piston's lathered up with oil. Every rod, journal, every Babbitt, wherever it was, has oil in it. The camshaft has got it. The lifters are way more full than they need to be.
Right.
The cam gears that whole front of the engine is pretty full of oil right now.
Uh-huh.
So there's lots of things that'll burn off.
Okay.
Plus it's been a freshly painted engine, so that's going to burn off. So it's going to smoke a little bit for the first few minutes probably.
Yes. Okay.
And then it should be, if we're lucky, it should be a nice running smooth engine and sound like a V8. So the things we're going to check is this carburetor is a 2-barrel Updraft bronze. There really aren't any 2-barrel Updraft bronze carburetors because there's very few V8 engines made in this era. And if they had a V8 in this era, which there were a few, Cadillac and a couple others had one, they would have a carburetor in both banks. This has one carburetor with twin barrels in it, which is pretty cool. It also is an updraft. So an updraft is more efficient as far as not leaking into the engine at least. And then also this carburetor is fed by water. So here's the radiator, and the radiator, the large 2.5-inch diameter line goes right to the intake manifold, and I guess the water goes right into the carburetor. It must run on water. Well, maybe it doesn't. So maybe you want to heat up a carburetor when it's running. And maybe you want to use the heat or the coolness that a carburetor has, because when a carburetor runs, it gets really cold.
Yes.
So having a carburetor mounted to a water jacket heats up the carburetor, which makes the engine warm up much quicker, and it also cools the water. So how this works is, yes, there's water in the intake manifold, but there's sections inside the intake manifold.
So that's like, that manifold is carrying both the air-fuel mixture
Yes,
and the coolant
and the coolant.
at the same, in different passages at the same time.
That's right. So, and I said, you run it dry. If the head gaskets are leaking, you also run it dry. Dry meaning no gasoline, you're not going to fire it, because you have water in here.
Right.
So you're separating water from fuel mixture flow in these intake manifolds.
Okay.
So these can't leak, otherwise you hydrolock the engine.
Right.
But if this is running correctly, it's a super nice design that they've definitely engineered it to run correctly. That's a pretty neat thing. You would never dream that this is water and fuel mixture.
Right. That is amazing.
But it is. That's how you drain the water out of it.
That's for draining the water. Okay, so that's the drain plug for the water. And you were saying that the 2 barrels, one feeds each side of the engine, is that right?
That's correct.
Wow.
So each side is adjustable. So you could, we're able to balance this even better as an engine. But when you just look under the hood, it looks like an engine under a hood.
Yeah.
But it's some pretty high-tech things are happening.
Yeah, there's more going on than you automatically would notice.
Yeah. So that's why you really want to prepare slowly on starting it, because there's lots of things that could fail and then cause major discomfort. So the carburetor, as we open up the fuel, which is this, it drains from the vacuum tank into the carburetor. There's a plunger here that goes up and down. If it's got fuel, it's down, and it is down. We can't push it anymore. So right now we've checked it. We have fuel because this is in the down position.
Okay.
Because I opened this a few minutes ago.
Okay.
So right now it has fuel, and we're going to see if it'll start.
Okay, so what are you going to monitor here when you start up?
Okay, the first thing we're going to do is this says Strangler. So we've got to turn the Strangler on. So we've got to strangle the engine. So strangling the engine means you're choking it. So they didn't want to use the word choking, so they're going to use strangling.
Interesting.
So this is a strangler. So we're going to strangle the engine. So it's now strangled.
Okay.
Okay. That's the clock. We didn't wind it. That's the tach, a speedometer. This is the gradiometer for hill climb racing.
Oh, wow.
That's an oil pressure gauge, which we're going to see that raised to 20 to 30 pounds if it runs correctly.
Okay. All right.
That's a generator gauge. That's going to read 10 amps if the generator is working.
Okay.
And if we want to turn the headlights on, these are all of our lights, which we just turn this back and forth, it turns our lights on.
I see. Okay.
This is our key to turn the ignition on,
Okay.
but it doesn't start it. And then the starter button is here.
Okay.
They didn't have starter solenoids back then, so there's two big copper plates inside there, and you push this in with a couple pounds of pressure and engages those copper plates, which sends current directly to the starter.
So that's connected mechanically.
Mechanically, yes, by your thumb.
You're right.
And you're pushing it.
Okay. Interesting.
And these are more lights too. And then this last thing here is a service gauge. So right now it has 23 gallons of gas, and then you write down when you change the oil, and this is a service gauge.
Okay.
It reminds you. And then this is the altimeter, so you can adjust your carburetors. And then because this car has no doors, they never designed any doors, this is how you can get in. It's called a Fat Man steering wheel.
There you go.
And you can get in there with that without any door, and then you snap in position and you're ready to drive. You've got a 3-speed transmission on the floor, and that's your emergency brake.
Okay. And then the pedals on the floor are pretty typical of even today, right?
Yep, regular pedals.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to turn the key on, and I'm going to hit the starter and see if it starts.
Okay.
Okay, it's starting to not. Okay, hear that hesitation where it kind of goes and stops and goes again?
Yeah.
The timing's too far advanced.
Okay.
So we're going to retard the timing a little bit. So Ray, you retard the timing. You don't run a timing light on an antique car motor because these are solid spark plugs and solid wires. So there's no resistor. So you have to do it by your seat of your pants. You can't use a timing light.
Interesting.
So to retard the timing, you snap the cap off the distributor, and you see which way the rotor's going.
Okay.
So now we're going to hit the starter again and see which way the rotor's going.
Okay.
Okay, it's going that direction.
Yep.
So now we're going to turn the distributor that same direction, which retards it. Okay.
Okay.
So I've retarded it because I put the distributor in the same direction
as it turns.
Right. And don't need to go very far. And when it actually starts, we'll set the timing even better. But it was delaying there at top dead center, so it's trying to fight the ignition.
I see. Yeah, it felt like it was pushing back against it. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now we'll put the cap back on. Try it again.
Definitely turning faster. Wow.
It runs.
It sounds really good.
All right, good. nothing underneath. The oil should burn off in 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then it shouldn't smoke any, I hope. We have a nice 20 pounds of oil pressure, and that idle with our distribution center, that's about right.
Okay.
And if I give it some gas, that should probably go to around 40.
Yeah, you can see it's
Yeah, so it's more.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of oil for it to burn off,
Yeah.
the assembly stuff, and it's pretty thick stuff it's burning off.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to take a little bit.
Yep.
Well, you got to be very pleased, though.
Yeah, I am. It's going. And it sounds like it's a V8 race car.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah. I'll use a thermal indicator after I shut it down and then see what the temperature on each one, but I can't do it right now really anyway because some are going to be oil fouled a little bit because of the assembly.
Right.
But you can see that that's not oil burning, that's just oil that's inside of that. Other things inside there too, so it'll get that out of there.
How much have you driven this prior to the engine rebuild? How many miles have you driven this car?
On the original engine, maybe 10,000 miles.
Okay.
It had one bank, didn't even have 5 pounds of compression if it wasn't started and wasn't heated up. And the other bank had 30 or 40 pounds. But as soon as it warmed up and you shut it off, you had compression.
Okay.
But it was only about 3 to 1, and now it should be in the 8 to 1 area.
Yeah.
And again, we're looking at 110 mile an hour with it now when I get it all sorted and things are broken in correctly.
And you're saying that you said you used to maybe hit 80 before?
I can go 80 before.
So you're thinking, and then you're not changing any of the gearings. You're saying that's all because of RPM.
Right, and
power.
smoothness, right.
Yeah, okay.
We'll let it burn its oil off here, and then the next episode we'll actually drive it down the road, but it needs to relax right now and get all that stuff out of the system.
We want to do it the right way.
Yep. Hot. Hot. Hot.
By way of explanation, he's checking each cylinder individually for temperature to make sure they were all firing. So far we have 4 out of 4.
Hot. 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 So it's all running exactly like it's supposed to. It's going to take, we can't just let it sit. We need to actually put it in the air so the radiator can get some cooling.
Yeah.
Yes, is the fan spinning? Yes, but the fan is this big and the radiator is this big.
Right.
So it's not really cooling like it's supposed to.
Sure.
So we'll drive it, at slow speed, maybe 40 mile an hour, just to get that stuff burned off of it, and then it should be really good. Then we'll get into maybe the next video balancing the carburetors.
Oh yeah.
Balancing the barrels on the inside, then adjusting the timing, so we can adjust it on the inside also. So I would go down the road, say at 40 mile an hour, and I would advance the timing all the way up and see if it starts to ping up there or to jump at all whatsoever. If it does that whatsoever, then we'd turn the distributor, take the whole timing down a little bit, the timing range.
Okay.
So we'd make that better.
Yeah, basically put an upper limit on where you're going to go with timing. Is that
and
right?
the lower limit is basically at top dead center.
Okay.
So the lower limit right now, the RPM idling might be 600 or something. If I turn the timing all the way back to top dead center, which you can do on an antique car, it might take the RPM at idle down to 150 RPM, which is cool anyway.
Yeah.
But you can't leave it there because it'll overheat really bad.
Right.
So the more the timing is advanced, the less heat that the engine generates.
Okay. Okay.
So we still have things to sort out for sure.
We have a lot to look forward to.
Oh, and then I'm going to adjust the valves because I adjusted all these valves, literally a month ago, and I didn't adjust the valves with the engine together. The pan was off, everything was off. I did it from the bottom of the engine,
Really?
where the push rods go in, and I adjusted it for 12/1000ths of an inch.
Okay.
You know, because I could do it underneath.
Yeah, right.
The way these are, you can't really adjust them very easily. So, and the push rods are external, and they're going up and down.
Yeah.
And you hear the clicking.
Yeah.
So I have clearance, so that's good. And then I made these push rods out of stainless steel,
Yeah.
so they're not picking up the oil. And the neat thing is, my hands are clean after doing that. And before, they would be just mucky because they were just pulling up oil.
Right. The whole time you've owned this car, you.
Right.
Yeah.
So it should be a really clean car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it peed on the ground now, but that's
Yeah.
the radiator from overflowing from sitting still.
Yep. Okay.
And right now it's going to generate, twice the amount of heat that would normally, because the friction losses right now are great.
Right.
So the idle right now might be 600 RPM, but once it breaks in and kind of gets that Babbitt kind of melted in the right spots, this same setting of idle might be 850 RPM because the friction won't be there. But right now we have tremendous friction.
Okay.
So if right now I the hand crank, I probably would not be able to start it still.
Right.
But after we go out for a half-hour ride on the freeway and go for 30 or 40 miles, 50, whatever, we come back, I'll probably be able to hand crank it again. And I'd like to do that.
So, just for my understanding of how Babbitts get broken in, obviously you already described towing it around initially just to kind of get all the high spots, you might say, or whatever.
Yep.
But then I guess there's some heat cycles and some getting them good and warm. Is that what
the
happens?
heat cycles will, even if there's really pinched areas like on the sides that are really too tight, but you can't put plastic gauge on the sides because you don't know to put it there, and because you can't put plastic gauge on the side anyway because you have to have pressure straight down. You can't have it side motion.
Right.
But that side motion is still restrictive.
Yeah.
So Babbitt, when it gets warm enough or hot enough on a hot spot, will actually re-melt in that same spot and be the right diameter, right dimension. I mean, you don't set up all of it to do that.
No, but there's some kind of self-healing or whatever you would
There's
call
a little bit of self-healing on fresh new Babbitt. That, when you get all done and you take that rod out a year from now, you think, boy, that's perfect. Well, it did it itself.
Yeah.
It's like you had solder and it kind of,
found its best space to be.
Right. It's not solder, but I mean, it's kind of like that.
It's a soft, very soft metal.
Very soft, meltable, pourable metal.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, I can't wait to come back for the next round. Okay, great. Thank you, Alan. Okay. This is great.
Oil should burn off in 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
It shouldn't smoke any